my guest is here. So I want to go to my guest. We are joined with one of my favorite guests, the man himself, Dr. Jeff Rich. He is even in a suit today. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm very well,
I
or
can't
should
hear
I
you.
say,
There
хорошо,
you
добрый вечер.
are. I'm glad you could join me, man. And just for the
Yes.
bio, Dr. Jeff Rich, he's a historian, author, retired government official from Melbourne, Australia. With a PhD in history and over 3 decades of experience in governing, he created the Burning Archive YouTube channel and Substack, where he shares commentary, book reviews, and interviews on world history, culture, and politics. He's written 4 books, including 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. Jeff, always glad you could join me, man. Um,
It's wonderful to join you, Jamal.
I watched your video on
Hmm.
quantum mechanics and classical physics,
Mm.
and you were using that allegory because Putin, I think he mentioned that in the first part of his speech, and you were using that allegory to kind of talk about multipolarity versus hegemony and how there needs to be a changeover in the point of view. That was Putin. That was a thrust of Putin's speech, right? That look, this hegemony stuff is over with, and we need a new view in the way that we look at international politics. And this idea of a hegemon controlling events that is done, or at the very least, it is coming to an end, and it's coming to an end rapidly. Um, I don't know if this is a new paradigm. It feels like an old paradigm. It feels like this wasn't quantum physics that the West was effectively using. And I know you were using the term classical, but I don't think what they were doing was classical. The hegemony thing or the hegemon thing, these guys are delusional in their thinking. And Putin seems to be talking about physics early on, like, force equals mass times acceleration. The speed of gravity is X, 9.8 meters per second squared on Earth. Like, this seems that he's effectively saying, look, we need to go back to a traditional style of realpolitik in the way that we engage one another, not this permutation in the political space or the foreign policy space where hegemon is dictating events. Give me your take on that. I mean, how did you view the speech?
Well, he definitely says the world of hegemony is over, and that the era in which there's one power that dictates is gone and is never going to come back. But he also
Mm-hmm.
says that we're not also going back to a world of great powers where, there's, an elite group of powers who get to divide up the world themselves. And the quantum mechanics point is really about what his general point about how the world has changed over the last 25, 30 years, in fact, during the time of his presidency. So it's not just a sort of, YouTuber commenting on it. It's not just a international relations academic commenting on it. It's the person who's actually been at the center of the events, acting within them, commenting on this. And he
Mm-hmm.
says that the order of complexity of the international system it has really changed dramatically. And it's in that context that he talks about quantum mechanics. It's sort of like we've got to deal with higher levels of unpredictability, more bigger kinds of changes, more unpredictable changes, more uncertainty about how things are going to go. And I'm no scientist. I sort of dropped out of science into like grade 10 or something like that. So I'm probably better on interpreting Pushkin. But that is really, I guess, the principle he's saying. That he's saying we're in a world that's complex, non-linear, and ambiguous, and that demands a different way of acting by states and a different way of interpreting how states are going to act. And he says that, there are so many players in the international system who can play a part now. It's a more democratic system, it's a more open system. So that this idea that we can sort of sit, Russia and America can sit down and sort of sort out the world between them, or Russia and China and America can sit down and sort out the world between them, is just no longer the case. So I think what he's saying is the the way international politics work has changed, changed utterly, to quote some more poetry, but and that our thinking about it needs to adapt, but also the actual practice needs to adapt. And he sort of went through a range of things there as well. Yeah, so that I mean that's my sort of overall, that's the big picture kind of thing. But the speech was also working at a couple of other levels as well in terms of what he was saying about Russian resilience, what he was saying about how the war's progressing, and the sort of practical diplomacy that he was undertaking as well, such as the warnings, I guess, to the United States and also to Europe about weapons and further militarization.
Yeah, I agreed. The multipolarity thing is fascinating to me. And he spent, I would say, probably the entirety of his speech talking about this new world that has been created or that's being developed. And the most brutal comments went towards Europe, effectively saying they've lost sovereignty, they'll never be what they were. In fact, he even made the point, and I want to get your take on this. When he was talking about Trump, there are 2 points of view on this. Some people said that he was being too weak in dealing with Trump. Because Putin, in his speech, made a point of saying, well, if Trump was in office, I don't think the war would have taken place. Okay, for one, I don't know that. I don't know that right now. Two, when he was talking about the attack Adams, he was like, yeah, this will diminish the relationship between Russia and the United States. Again, this is very mild language, as opposed to Europe, who he seemed to just brutalize all throughout the speech. I mean, he called Macron little Napoleon for stealing boats. Napoleon during this time frame was creating this kind of blockade of sorts. And basically stealing boats is piracy, even making the point of saying pirates will be destroyed. But for the US, it was far less brutal in his comments, even though in the speech he did recognize that the United States was involved in some activities. For example, this was one of the comments he made when he was talking about the United States. And he points out that, I think this was on drones, and he points out that the United States was most likely behind Europe's behavior in these kind of false flags.
Mr. Putin, why are you sending so many drones to Denmark? Don't do that.
I promise I won't do it anymore. Not to Denmark, not to France, not to Copenhagen. Where else are they flying? Lisbon. People are interested.
What? Okay.
Yeah, so that was part of the Q&A, wasn't he? And I mean, you sort of lose it a little bit with the translator voices or the AI type voices as well. But there was, I don't know if I should say taking the P word type thing, but there was an element of just, gentle mocking of all of that with the commentator Fyodor Lukyanov there as well. But look, there are points in the speech where he's pretty tough on the United States, I would say, and implicitly in a lot of his comments, he's sort of perhaps targeting Europe as the front line, but he's very clear that the United States is the principal orchestrating power behind it as well. I mean, there's the reference to this sort of Russian saying that there's no counter to a crowbar except another crowbar. And I've just got the translation, the Russian translation of the speech, which people can check. I mean, the full translation of the entire session is now up on the Kremlin website. So people might want to check that because some of the sort of YouTube translations are a little bit iffy. But he's basically saying there that expression means you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. And attempts to control everything inevitably generate tension, undermining stability at home and prompting ordinary pets. So he's directing that at America, at Europe, but he's also directing it at America. So, and the sort of I guess the comment about Trump as well. He says he thinks that's right, that it could have been avoided if Trump had been in office, but that in itself is a little bit ambiguous. It could have been, but he didn't. And he says, and it could have been avoided if Biden had organized his relationships differently, and if Obama had done things differently as well.
Yep.
So, I mean, I saw Gilbert Doctorow's sort of conversation. I think it was Glenn Deason about.
Give me your take on that. I'm super curious on your take on that, because there are different points of view on this. Because I watched the entirety of the speech, and I had a very different take on that than Dr. Rowe. I mean, Dr. Rowe went extreme on this. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, he was saying, well, maybe there's going to be a coup against Putin now because he wasn't tough enough at the Valdai conference.
Right.
And I mean, calm down, Gilbert. I mean, the entirety of Russia's diplomatic communications are not targeted at satisfying YouTube commentators.
Yeah, but Dr. Rowe I've seen him as brilliant, especially on the topic of Russia. And he was extreme on this. He was like, they're going to take Putin out of the coup because they think he's too weak.
It was pretty. And look, I mean, I'll be interested to hear what Mark Sloboda might have to say a little bit, because obviously I'm, far away in Melbourne, so I can only get a certain kind of assessment about how people are responding. But he did seem quite strong and consistently strong. And, if you're a political leader who's been in charge of a country for 25 years and is pretty confident of your place in the world kind of thing, and has seen off a few presidents, and actually has to deal one-on-one with Donald Trump, and maintain a relationship and all that sort of stuff. You're not just going to blow him off at a international conference, which is largely for there's no practical business that is done, so to speak, in the Valdai conference. It's about communicating Russia's diplomatic and international message, its cultural sort of it's cultural soft power, I guess, if you like. So, I mean, if there is a tough message to be delivered to Washington about Tomahawk missiles, and he did deliver a tough message within the speech about Tomahawk missiles, then I think it's not going to be done, in a panel session at Valdai. It's going to be done through other mechanisms. Sergei Lavrov will be ringing Marco Rubio and saying, get your head together, Marco.
Yeah.
And the other thing, there was some subtleties, I think, in some of the comments that Putin made during the speech as well, that may well, I think, be targeted at a more European diplomatic audience rather than the American diplomatic audience. I mean, on the surface, he was tough and mocking towards Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And on the surface, he was saying, hopeless, they've lost sovereignty, which he also related to their sense of their culture as well, their independent culture. But you could also interpret that as goading them to saying, you can't put up with being the United States being your overlord for much longer. You really need to respond to it. It's affecting your economies, it's affecting your societies, it's affecting your diplomatic reputation. The rest of the world, the global majority, has moved on. Why don't you move on as well and join us in this world? And I don't know if you noticed, there was exchange at one point in the Q&A session where Putin talked about Jupiter, what's allowed to Jupiter is allowed to the bull, and it led to some jokes
Yes.
about animal husbandry and all that sort of stuff. And there's a reference there that I would say absolutely Emmanuel Macron would get, and I would say most of the quality European diplomatic, bureaucratic class, not necessarily Kaya Kallas, but she's a political person. Because do you know what this story is? The
No.
Jupiter and the bull.
I didn't quite get it. No.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of worth explaining because so Jupiter is like Roman Greek god. It was Zeus in the Greek version, and the story is that Jupiter transforms himself into a bull to seduce a beautiful young woman who he then sort of abducts and seduces. Yeah, because every beautiful young woman is immediately attracted to a bull.
Right.
And takes the woman off to Crete. Now, the name of the woman, which Putin did not spell out, but I'm sure if he's referring to this, he would know. And the surface meaning of the story was, the powerful can get away with double standards, kind of thing, like, what's allowed to Jupiter is not allowed to the bull. But
I see.
the name of the woman is Europa, and that's she.
Yeah.
That is the figure from mythology that Europe is named after. So he's basically invoking a story about, some guy who thinks he's ruler of the world, or god of the world, most powerful god in the world, raping Europe and abducting Europe. And he reinforces the point. He says, everyone knows about the double standard, but then he reinforces the point to talk about it in the context of, America is applying complete double standards around the question he was asked, for which this is a response, was actually about America is buying uranium,
Right.
more uranium from Russia than anybody else, and he's saying, well, it's just an energy source like everything else. America is having its sort of privilege. So I actually think there were lots of these kind of subtle digs throughout the whole thing. You could even say that the whole reference to Borodino and Pushkin to bring in that sort of poetry it was actually about that, because he's drawing a direct comparison between Russia's invasion in 1812 by Napoleon.
Right.
Then leader of France, but also a ideologically charged, revolutionary leader, product of the French Revolution, who effectively conquers most of Europe, Poland, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, etc., Spain. He's basically commander of Europe and invades Russia. And the question is, well, who's Napoleon today? It's not France. Napoleon is the United States today. Yes. And it's the United States that's been at the head of this whole coalition, if you like. It's been the guiding star of the group of powers that have effectively attempted a slow motion invasion of Russia through the eastward expansion of NATO. And so the reference to Borodino, I think, is very, very consciously saying, we're sort of in our Borodino moment sort of thing, or maybe 2022 was the Borodino moment, that we start to turn the corner, and also Russia, in its sort of national consciousness, its cultural vitality, its sense of political self-confidence as well, has thrown off the invader and started to push back. So
Okay.
I actually think that is, it was very much what he was referring to. And if viewers haven't seen the whole thing, I think it's in the first or second question after the speech. Putin actually comes on stage with a book, and he brings out the book in the first or second question and says, this book is, a book I've got at home. I was browsing it, and, I want to read a poem from it. And the poem is Pushkin, who is the great national writer, national poet in Russia. And the poem is the anniversary of Borodino. And you see, Jamal, for I was, browsing a book at home, got out my Pushkin.
Look, I gotta be honest with you. I think it's more brutal than I think the way you're describing it.
Yeah.
I mean, because that poem was talking. I think there's a part of that poem where he's talking about the skulls of something like that, basically the dead. That are laying in the graves or in the ashes of the conflict.
I think
what Putin is trying to get across to them is, look, Russia defeated its enemies in this case.
Exactly.
But all of those people had to die, and an invasion had to take place for that defeat to stick. Meaning, I don't think we've seen that Borodino moment yet, because the West is still pushing in this regard. And you're seeing two conflicting ideologies at work. One, we want multipolarity. We don't want a hegemon, with a hegemon saying, no, we must have a hegemon. Okay, well, that's irreconcilable, right? Somebody has to lose that. Somebody has to be diminished in that. And the Ukraine military conflict, on some level, is the beginning of that diminishment, but it's only the beginning of it. He very well could be talking about, you're bringing us to the brink of a third world war. And if at the end of that war, a new reality will take place, meaning either we're all just not going to be here, or whoever is going to be here is going to be the determining factor in what that world looks like after the fact. That poem may be more brutal than just Ukraine. That poem could be a reference to a third world war, with the idea that you lose this war and the reality of the world changes. This is no longer a hegemonic world. This world is now a multipolar world as a result of this, you could say, thematic conflict that changed the point of view in the context of that world. I mean, I guess it depends on how far you want to take the poem or the analogy, but the fact that he brought the book on stage, he is obviously getting across something.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's 2 points. One is, I mean, Borodino was, in some ways, you could almost compare it to some of the doctoral sort of criticisms of Putin for not being, tough enough with the because it was like Alexander and Kutuzov and the leadership of Russia in 1812 was being criticized for not pushing back hard enough. Borodino is a key moment, but after Borodino they withdraw again, and then Napoleon occupies and burns Moscow. So,
well, Moscow burned itself, if I remember correctly. Like, meaning they set those fires. Oh, am I getting that wrong? You're the historian.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yes, you're right. They set it on fire as they're sort of leaving.
Yes.
So you could see it as, and the entire Russian strategy during that war was to fight a defensive war. And you can say in many ways that's what Russia has been doing. It's been fighting a defensive war. It's not been overly aggressive. It's sort of absorbing a lot, perhaps taking more than some people, are comfortable accepting, but ultimately with the aim of being able to push back. And, that they will not want to not just push, NATO back to the Dnieper River. They will want, as they proposed in 2021, to push NATO back to its 1997 borders, or even have a whole new arrangement as well. So I feel there is perhaps a conscious reference to that as well. But the other thing, of course, about 1812, all that sort of stuff, is this is the whole plot of Tolstoy's War and Peace. It's part of the story told in Pushkin's poem and other poems. It's the sort of rebirth, I guess, of sort of a national consciousness, a community spirit, all this sort of thing within Russia. Now, historians will argue about whether some of that is, 19th century propaganda and all that sort of thing. But I think it is certainly a truth that, that adversity in 1812 had a profound effect. And, the golden age of Russian culture in the 19th century is, part of the extraordinary blossoming since. So in evoking the story of Pushkin, it was also connected to some of the other themes of his speech, which were all about Russian resilience, and saying that, America and Europe have tried to remove Russia, to cancel Russia, to remove Russia from the global stage. But I think he says explicitly somewhere, you cannot do that. You just cannot remove Russia from the global stage. It failed in 1812, it failed in 1941, and it failed in 2022.
Yeah, it's Russian identity seems to be what he's evoking.
And there were a bunch of, he talked about young people adopting national dress. I mean, there's a phrase in Russian that Pushkin, which he referred to, Pushkin is our everything, because he's like Shakespeare for the English, I guess, or even more significant because it is connected to that, huge national trauma of 1812. And I think there were a few other kind of references through the speech as well that I can't quite remember. But that whole story of Russian resilience, economically, politically, diplomatically, militarily, because, he was, with the drone comments, he was quite mocking of
yes, he was.
the drone stories, and very confident, and, quite tough in his assessments too of progress of on the battlefield and all that sort of thing. But also culturally as well.
I'm curious on something else though, but do you think Dr. Roy has a point? I don't buy the whole Russia is going to rise up and overthrow Putin because he was weak in the speech. I don't buy that. Yeah. But I do think he has a point about something else, though. Putin made this point of saying, let me find the clip, basically, don't push us into a corner, like don't provoke us. Right here. And I want to get your take on something after this, because I think they've been provoking you the entire time, man. All of this is provocation. By the way, I think that's Kofi. Kofi is a guest on my show. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's him.
Russia, on many occasions, when threats to our peace and security come to the fore, and threats to our sovereignty and our statehood, we are swift in responding. No, you should not provoke us. Never, ever did it end badly for the provocateurs, and no exceptions will happen in future. There will be none. Our history proved that weakness is unacceptable because it gives rise to temptation, to a delusion that and anything may be resolved with us, and they may have their way from the position of force and indecisiveness and weakness. Russia will never demonstrate that.
Right there. That's this comment or this statement by Putin fascinates me. Oh, it fascinates me to no end. All of this has been provocations, right? I mean, the movement of NATO, the overthrow of the Ukrainian government, the ignoring of Minsk, the attacks on the energy grid that are taking place right now. Why hasn't Russia destroyed the SBU? Like, meaning the fact that Zelensky and all of these goons can run around completely safe. Okay, what is going on with that? Meaning, from the European perspective, they seem to believe Russia is not going to respond. And all of the provocations up to the point of the special military operation, Russia really didn't respond. And then they respond in this overwhelming way of going into Ukraine and end up in a war that's been lasting for 3 years. Okay, well, the European perspective is if the US gets involved, Russia is not going to respond. Or if we take Russian ships, Russia is not going to respond. And on some level, I think what Dr. Rowe is kind of getting across, Russia has taught Europe a lesson that it won't respond to these provocations. And I guess the point is, Putin can say that because obviously there's a line where Russia will respond, meaning if you push him far enough into a corner, he's going to come out fighting from that corner. But there's also a point to be made that the reason that you're being pushed into a corner is because they don't think you're serious based on previous things that you've effectively allowed. Meaning, I guess what I'm asking is, doesn't Dr. Rowe have a point? Not that they're going to overthrow the Russian government, but weakness is not seen as pragmatism. It's being seen as weakness and has been emboldening enemies in the same way that Putin just made that point, saying, look, we're not going to accept this. We're going to be implacable because we don't want to give them delusions that they can continue to do what they're doing. And I guess I'm saying, isn't that what Russia has done up to this point, though, by not being more aggressive in how it's dealt with these issues?
It could be the case, but I wonder whether it is not, because I guess you, to some degree, you need to know what the intelligence is about. Well, what is Europe really doing? Like all these drone, sort of incidents and all this sort of stuff. I mean, maybe they say we can see through the fact that you're just playing games. I do wonder whether, the Czech election was on the weekend as well, so it does seem to be quite interesting timing to be creating an invasion sort of scare. So maybe they sort of assess these events as perhaps not as significant as otherwise. Even the Tomahawks people have said, well, there are reports that they don't even have enough Tomahawks to actually supply them. So,
right.
And maybe Russia is also aware of that sort of intelligence. So there's that sort of question. But at a broader level, Putin actually says in the speech, in the section where he talks about the complexity and the need to balance off the reactions and somewhat unpredictable reactions of a very large number of players. And he says he's not just talking theoretically, he is talking from his direct experience over the last, 25 years. And he says, there have been times where I've thought about doing X, but then I've had to think about what its impact would be on, X, Y, or Z. And there have been other situations where I've chosen to do nothing because any action by me would actually be, counterproductive or cause an unpredictable escalation of the issue. Yeah. And, given some of the zealots and some of the hardheads and some of the hardware involved, the risk of an unpredictable escalation, I think, has got to be something that Putin constantly has to sort of weigh up, not just from Europe, but also from America. So, that would be my doubt, I guess, or question. I mean, is it about a trade-off between things? I mean, if you think about it, say with the India's role in the oil sanctions, right? That was absolutely crucial to the mitigation of the economic impact of the sanctions and on the diplomatic victory, if you like, for Russia during this war. The fact that it was able to keep India as a neutral partner who's buying Russian oil, stabilizing the international oil price, those kind of things. If, say, Russia had gone in hammer and tongs, American style, and bombed the living daylights out of Kiev in the first 3 days of the war or something like that, and they had lost the support of India, and India had said, yes, you're a strong partner, but this is unconscionable. We've got students in Ukraine, etc. You're putting their lives at risk, all this sort of thing, and you're putting us in an impossible position because we also have to work with the United States, all this sort of things. So we're withdrawing your support, and we won't buy your oil. I mean, that would have then maybe Joe Biden's prediction that the ruble would be rubble could possibly
To be fair,
come
Jeff,
into play.
I accept that.
Yeah.
I do accept that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I do accept that.
No, that's all right.
But I don't. But that's not really what I mean, though. Like, for example, blowing up Nord Stream. Okay, that's a big deal. Moving weapons from various European cities, knowing full well that those European cities are directly involved in the military campaign against Russia. He even said it in the speech that they're in the war directly. I mean, that's the first time I've ever heard Russia acknowledging not mercenaries. These are European fighters that are in this conflict. Okay, well, that's a casus belli also, right? Like Kagan, for example, when he wrote that piece, I forget exactly where he wrote the piece. He pointed out in this kind of weird way, he was like, yeah, Russia had justification to basically hit outside of Ukraine, but they chose not to do that. Yeah, I'm glad you acknowledged that, Kagan. Like, I'm glad Victoria Nuland's husband recognizes that all of these European cities that are directly contributing to the war aims and putting in military equipment and everything else, that they are targets, legitimate targets that Putin has avoided hitting. And good for him. He's trying to keep the war isolated. So I'm not saying that he should have blew up Kiev, nor am I saying he should have done more damage. I guess I'm saying in one provocation after the next, he has been far more pragmatic. And pragmatic to the point of saying, look, I'm not going to try to start the Third World War. But I guess my thing is, you're not the one who's starting the Third World War. They're pushing NATO to your borders. They blew up your pipeline. They are blowing up your trains with civilians on those trains. They are having the Crocus massacre where they kill hundreds of people in that massacre. And that was obviously put on by Ukraine. All of these things were just terrorist activities. And the organization that did it was the SBU. So it's like, but the organization is still standing. The building still exists. Those people who are carrying out these terrorist attacks are still continuing to carry out these terrorist attacks without a firm response from Moscow in going after denazifying Ukraine at the root of it. Yes, you've been killing it out of Ukrainians. A lot of, many of these people have just been dragged off the streets. But going to the source has not been something that Russia has wanted to do. I'm saying, doesn't that get something across that there are limits, that there are hard limits, that Russia is not willing to go beyond, even though the West has no limits in the way that they engage and respond?
Yeah, I think it could be, and I know, and it's just but I think my only question would be, if you're in that sort of decision-making responsibility, in charge of a country, if you're going to do something, let's say, I don't know, some sort of, the thing people always talk about is, the Oreshnik, without getting myself censored, I could I could imagine, maybe just having a small smile, for example, if there's an Oreshnik that sort of landed on the British base in Cyprus at some point. But,
Yeah.
Something like that, some sort of dramatic escalation that sort of really says, enough fun and games, guys.
Yeah, we're done.
This is what we can do. But you have to be really sure that it would have the desired consequence, and I guess that's part of his speech, that it's this unpredictable linear sort of world, and if you're not really sure that it's going to have the desired impact, given the kind of escalation that could be, that could lead to, nuclear weapons, whatever. Is it better to be safe than sorry, even if that is chipping away perhaps at your sort of sense of prestige, your sense of power. But if your overall assessment is that you have destroyed Europe's largest army, which they have,
Yes.
3 times over, that you've both militarily and politically sort of neutralized the United States in some way. So you don't want to sort of get them so annoyed that they sort of, change their minds and start to go, sort of Hiroshima style. Or then that is a difficult trade-off, but perhaps the right trade-off to make. Yeah. And I've totally sympathise with what you say, and I do wonder about it. But I also feel that just blowing off a bit of steam about eye for an eye, or let's restore our sense of national pride, or let's restore deterrence, whatever that is, which is just in many ways it's just an imagined thing. It's actually not a real scenario, deterrence. I just feel that's the kind of calculation they must be making.
And to be fair, I don't fully agree with my point of view on this. Like, meaning, I get the point. If we are here in 5 years, then Putin was right. When we still exist and the war is over with, then Putin was right. He had a point, right?
Well, that would be a good outcome.
It's not about blowing off steam. It's about, like, I'll give you an example. I'll give you a real world example. Let's say Europe have been doing these false flags. Oh my God, there's a missile that fell in Poland. A day later, oh right, this was a Polish missile. Oh my God, these drones, Russia's flying around with drones. A false flag happens. And Europe says, we now have reason to go into Ukraine. And they send in troops into Ukraine. Now, Russia, up to this point, has said, we will kill any European troop that comes into Ukraine. They will be fair game, and they will be, and they would have to, because otherwise they're just putting more troops. Does Europe believe him? Right. Because now you have a real world example of, if Europe doesn't believe Putin, and he thinks, or Europe thinks, Putin is bluffing because he's been more pragmatic and he doesn't want to attack European troops directly, then they will put those troops in. And again, Putin is now in a corner where he has to make a choice. Do I attack those European troops, as I said I would, or do I not attack those European troops? If they put in 5,000 troops as a tripwire, Putin doesn't attack them, there will be 100,000 troops in 2 months in Ukraine. Like, this is what I mean when I'm saying it's not about blowing off steam. It's about ensuring credibility, where the actions that you take, and when you make a point of saying, I will do this, if you do that, they have to actually believe it. What is the book? In Three Body, for example, there was what they call a sword holder. And the sword holder in Three Body, at a moment's notice, need to be able to hit a button that would destroy 2 worlds. That was his job. And as long as they believed he'd do it, everybody was safe. If they didn't believe he would do it, then everybody was at risk. meaning the very fact that I have this capability and your belief in me that I will destroy both worlds if you test me was the thing that kept those worlds safe. Whereas when the new sword holder took it, they didn't believe her, and both worlds ended up being destroyed. Putin, on some level, is a sword holder in this, and they have to believe that don't test me. Now the catch becomes if they don't believe him, we're all at risk because at some point they will push that line, and that line will cross over in war between NATO and and Russia. If they believe him, they may be less inclined to put troops in Ukraine. They may be less inclined to continue with this level of escalation. So it's not that I'm like, hey, they need to blow up Cyprus just for the hell of it. I don't think they should expand it beyond Ukraine.
That's what I think. But
because it's a blow up Cyprus. That'll teach them.
It's revenge from an old colonial boy. But anyhow.
Yeah, right. No, my thing is keep it isolated to Ukraine because that's the focus of the Russian military. But I don't know. It's tough. I mean, because you want to be instill credibility, but you don't want to go too far.
I think there's conflicting signals about how Europe assesses the risk, and I guess how the United States assess the risk. I mean, the military people from the US you speak to probably would have a better assessment of the US, but I'm assuming, but the fact that basically the US wants to get out of the war with as many benefits as they can and minimal risk is a pretty clear sign that they assess that they can't win it. So they don't want to get any further involved. I think Europe has interest to protect in Ukraine, but it's all very much placed or describe those as going in after a ceasefire or whatever, things like that, which is effectively saying after there's a peace negotiation, after there's a termination of hostility. So they don't want to go into Ukraine to win the war. They want to go in to Ukraine to sort of keep the peace, so to speak, afterwards. And to protect their interests. And then it is the second largest country in Europe. And, it was their largest army. So they do have real interest there. And within the political, groups within Europe, there are people who are increasingly saying, we've gone too far. Let's negotiate peace for God's sake. There's the switch in Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic over the weekend. I think the Italian foreign minister or defense minister has said, there's no way we're putting troops in Ukraine. There's Hungary, there's Slovakia. So there's sort of, a growing group that's perhaps not at critical mass yet and is not represented in the NATO organisation or in the EU organisation, senior leadership. But they're going to be, the NATO organisation is like, what's his name, Mark Rutte, etc. He's like the American political commissar in Europe, basically. I mean, he's saying, pay daddy the money now. But there's a significant group within Europe that are saying enough's enough, I think. And I regard Britain as a whole separate belligerent because they're just crazy braves there, and they're pursuing their own agenda. But I think it's different to the European Union, Europe's agenda. So I feel there is momentum there, and I also feel to some degree, aspects of Putin's commentary about Europe was actually playing to that growing sort of feeling within Europe as well, and appealing for that sort of political solution to it rather than going harder on the military side of things. But
Yeah, he's a
I'm a
diplomat.
more of a diplomatically oriented person rather than a military oriented person. So I might be overrating that, but I
No, I
kind
think Putin is
of,
also.
yeah.
I think Putin is more diplomatic oriented, like meaning his willingness to make deals, like the Minsk agreements, Istanbul agreements. Okay, that's willingness to make a deal even after the overthrow of the Ukrainian government. He was going to live with that government, despite the fact that the government had been overthrown and at that point was no longer its own, let's say, master of its own affairs. No, I think he is more diplomatic. If they gave him a deal that he thought was that allowed him to accomplish his objectives, he would probably take it. And even now, I suspect that at a certain point, when Putin or when Russia takes Donbass, he would turn around to Europe and says, "Okay, are we finished?" And they're going to say no. They're going to tell him no, hell no. Could be wrong. I mean, France, the government's just collapsed. The German government, I don't see merits being able to last through another election. By the way, what did you make of Angela Merkel? And personally, I used to like Angela Merkel. Merkel came out recently and say it's Poland and the Baltic states' faults that Europe is at war, and that they have too much outsized influence in this kind of inability for Europe to come to some consensus on anything real. Meaning, I get the sense that she bemoaned this idea of Europe losing its own sovereignty, something that, I mean, she fought for Nord Stream in order to get Nord Stream in effect. Like this wasn't Merkel had been there, 16 years? She had been there 16 years.
Yeah.
And so she was the face of Europe in that real sense. And you could make an argument that the power vacuum that was created when she left allowed for a complete U.S. takeover of Europe. Give me your take on that. You would know this better than I would.
I think that's really a shrewd point, Jamal. I mean, I do think. I mean, she had a level of diplomat, and this is one of the things Putin was saying. Like in this complicated world, you actually need skilled diplomats who can actually negotiate things. And he had there was some legendary one-on-one conversation between Merkel and Putin without translators and all this sort of stuff. So I think it really did make a difference. I mean, I can't really assess her sort of, domestic policy role. And, some people seem to hate her and all that sort of stuff. I'm actually planning to read her autobiography in a little while. It's on the desk there somewhere. But I do feel her observation about Poland and Eastern Europe is true, and people do talk about this sort of new Europe, and that was I feel that was part of the American distortion of European politics over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Poland became, Poland's quite a large country, and it is very instrumental in Europe, but it also has some very sort of noxious politics, I guess, and it has had a very particularly the sort of nationalist, Russophobic kind of dimensions to it, and which was discussed in the Valdai meeting as well. But I feel that has seriously unbalanced, the sort of European politics. I guess it's less France and Germany. You have all the old sort of Austro-Hungarian Empire, including Italy type sort of states as well. And then you've got Poland, the Baltics, whose role is distortedly focused on the military alliance with the United States. So they've become this sort of, American military flank on the east of Europe kind of thing. And I think really twisted things. So I think having a bit of a shift there would be really good. And maybe Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary also starting to move away from that.
Yeah, I guess my thing for Merkel, to be fair, there's people who you like before coming into politics. So I need to put a caveat around that. Like if I was in politics at the point where Merkel was already in office, I might have a completely different take of her. I think for me, it's this. When I first got into politics, Merkel was, I guess, on her way out.
Yeah.
And so she was, I don't know, I guess familiar in the case, in the sense at the point where she left, there was this level of unfamiliarity. I think Macron wanted to take over. He doesn't have the gravitas to do it. So I don't know. Last comment on this before we leave, though. This is right here. Putin is talking about effectively, hey, all of you who are interested in Russia's strategic defeat, it ain't happening. He just says it flat out. Calm down. I think he told him to take a shower or something like that.
Yeah, that's
They
right.
tried to destroy that. No, some are still obstinate in their desire to have their way, inflicting, as they say, the strategic defeat on this country. Well, okay. If they don't see the fact that this plan is doomed, if they're stubborn enough, well, I hope that life will show them, and the most stubborn, short-witted ones will understand. We heard numerous clamors about full blockade and threats about blockade, trying to make Russian people, as they said, and they had no scruples in saying that they wanted to make the Russian people suffer. And they came up with figmental plans. I think, ain't it time to calm down and look around and understand the real situation and try to build relationships?
Now, this goes back to your point about him being very political in the speech. And it's like, look, this ain't working. Like, your plans have failed. Look around. And basically, look at your countries. Your countries are falling apart around you. Are you still trying to do this? I don't know. Look, I know for Europe, they have eliminated any of the Russian language, like RT, Sputnik. You can't get that in Europe at this point. I know my ex, how propagandized too, yes, but also how little information they have coming from sources other than the sources that are imposed upon them by the governments of those countries. So I don't know how much of this speech is going to get relayed short of Putin calling Macron Napoleon, which is a shame. I mean, because it was a good speech. It's one thing if people come to their assessment and either agree with them or disagree with them. I get the sense that this is going to be entirely blocked out. So maybe the speech was to the world leaders themselves saying, are we going to continue to do this? Your governments are falling apart. Your economic space is crumbling. Are you still trying to accomplish this objective? It has failed. I'm going to give you the last word, Jeff.
Well, I think the kind of people like I used to be, the government officials would absolutely be, well, if they've got half a brain and half a level of professional integrity, would actually absolutely be watching it. And it's a pity that people don't actually get to watch the speech in Europe and also in Australia. There's a sort of a media sort of blackout on it. Because apart from anything else, you actually just get a sense of his manner, his way of dealing with issues, his sort of just the calmness, I guess, saying, calm down. Look, I've been doing this for 25 years. This is how the world works now. It's pretty complicated. And, I know you've said some nasty stuff about me, but, even so, we can get over that and sort of work together as well. And I do feel there are elements of the speech which were almost an invitation to the European leaders, the European, political, cultural elites, even obviously not the ones who are just mad, died in the war people, but politicians, political leaders ultimately are pretty pragmatic and flexible people who deal with failed plans every day of the week. And at some point, and like as you say, France, the government there has collapsed after 15 hours.
Right.
And Macron might has got a choice of forming a government with the Marine Le Pen party, National Rally, or with the left. And what's happened in this government is they've they kind of refuse to go towards the left. So one potential outcome here is they will go a little bit more towards the left and have a more compromised social social outcome, which would probably work for Macron. He might have to eat a little bit of humble pie, but the people, political leaders have, very well insulated, egos that can cope with that can cope with eating occasional bits of humble pie, especially when basically events just force their hand and say, well, okay, well, we lost that war, sure, let's move on.
That's going to be that's a lot of crow, Jeff.
It's going to be a lot of crow. But I think part of the skill that Putin has that like Trump doesn't and like previous American presidents haven't is, I think, and that the other states around the world, China and India, have to do is they have to lead America and Europe to accepting the fact that they've been defeated, but without humiliating them, saying, you can take the loss and still walk away as an important partner in this sort of new polycentric world. And I still think that is feasible, but there will need to be a reckoning within the politics and the cultures of the West as well, because I mean the last 5 years, last 10 years has just been like just something off the planet in terms of the indulgence of all sorts of hatreds really towards Russia. So,
Jeff, I always enjoy these conversations, man. I always learn something when we have these conversations. You have my deepest appreciation. So thank you for joining me. And I know it's late, so I even more so thank you for joining me. Just for the audience, Dr. Jeff Rich. He's a historian, author, retired government official from Melbourne, Australia. With a PhD in history and over 3 decades of experience in government, he created the Burning Archive YouTube channel and Substack. Burning Archive is a great YouTube channel. Definitely check it out, where he shares commentaries, book reviews, interviews on world history, culture, and politics. He's written several books, including 13 Ways of Looking at a Bureaucrat. It's only 13, huh?
We have to talk about that one time.
Yeah, we have to have the conversation. Jeff, you have a good night, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamal.
Bye-bye. I always enjoy talking to Dr. Jeff Rich. He's a great guy, and Burning Archive is a fantastic channel. Like I said, definitely check it out.